That was a strong mug. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us after lunch here at session 7B, GIE practice and geospatial location data. We have 3 presentations today, and just unlike the other sessions, we won't be holding all questions until the end. So instead, we'll take 5 minutes for questions and discussions right after each presentation finishes. So just that, you know. So our first presenters are Oliver Mundy and Maja Bott, and Oliver develops Earth observation solutions for climate change adoption at a European Space Agency. Previously at the International Fund for Agriculture Development, he integrated geospatial tools into the organization's operations to measure results and impacts. Joining him will be Maja Bott, who is a senior sector economist, digital transformation at the KfW Development Bank. She specialized in digital transformation, governance, and geodata management in international development. Oliver and Maja, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm giving this presentation together with Maja. Maja works for KfW, and I work for the European Space Agency. But today's my second day there, so don't ask me anything about my new job. So I used to work for IFAD for the last 8 to 9 years, and I've been looking at lots of project locations from IFAD project. So our topic here is a new IATI-based location standard for better data and impact. IATI stands for the International Aid Transparency Initiative. So this initiative wants to know where does funding in humanitarian and international development flow? So where does the funding come from and where does it go? And this is particularly important for evaluators, right? So that we know where these funds are. So far, this standard is at project level, and now our initiative, we want to bring this down to activity or a location level. And so this is what we call a project location or an activity location. WFP calls them assets. IFAD calls them investment locations. And the presentation just now we heard them was an intervention records. That's what this what we're talking about has many names: assets, activities, interventions, and so on. I wrote a book chapter on this on project location together with Kunwar and Rahat. And Kunwar says, without project locations, geospatial impact evaluation would not be possible. So it's really the foundation. You call it the foundation. So here we're trying to define what this is. So we define it as a set of geographical features and additional attributes that are part of a financially supported activity where it is not feasible to make any further geographical distinctions with regards to funding. And there are 3 elements. Basically, we have the activity / investment, the action, plus the geographical feature, which could be point, line, or polygon, plus the additional attributes. So when the activity was completed, if it has been completed, the cost, for example. So this looks like, we would argue that project location is always a point, line, or polygon. So this is GIS vector data. Here's a nice project from Rwanda, from an IFAD project 10 years ago, that closed 10 years ago, and it shows a dam. The project developed feeder roads. They had irrigated fields. They did a lot of terracing and trenching, so sustainable land management. They also mapped the water user unions and rice paddy things. And this, I think, this data set is a dream for evaluators, and not only for evaluators, but for many other operational procedures. So why is this important? Sorry, Kumar, this presentation is going beyond the impact evaluation. This is, in general, why this data is important for operations. First of all, we can measure results. This may sound very basic, but this type of data is not a standard yet within many agencies. So we can measure spatial results by calculating the number of hectares, the number of kilometers, and just counting the number of points. So this basic thing is not a standard yet, and that's why many results are probably not, completely correct. And once we have this data, just a simple calculation, we can compare it with indicators of the log frame. We can say, the project said 500 kilometers of road were developed, and now we can measure it and control it. So that's the first benefit. Secondly, we can monitor things much better. So we can plan our field visits. We can choose what we want to visit. Our auditors can use this data. They can actually go there and verify if the money has been spent on this type of infrastructure. We can use high resolution imagery to see, there's now a sharing shed in Lesotho, and there are like, I don't know how many, 50 others. Roads in Niger have been built. That's great. So this is a basic check that is not possible if you don't have the location data. And I've also mentioned procurement here. So most of the funding in IFAD goes through procurement, so through a competitive bidding process. So the governments basically hire contractors to hire them for the procurement process. And now we've built in like clauses in there that they have to collect the georeference data and have to forward it to us, so that everything that goes through procurement gets to get mapped, so that we can monitor like all the infrastructure. This data is also extremely important for safeguards. So banks are scared of, we want to do good, but we also have these rules to protect ourselves from things of unintended negative impacts. So once we have the location data, we can map them against, let's say, I call them risk layers: deforestation, protected areas, ecologically sensitive areas, or livestock migratory routes. So if we don't know where something happens, then we can't also assess the risk properly. And then, of course, for geospatial impact evaluation, we need this data. Kunwar here argues it's the foundation of a geospatial impact evaluation, right? The intervention records. If we don't know where something happened, we can attribute the activity and also the impact of the activity to a location. So basically, we have to define, it's important to define the geospatial footprint. It enables the assignment of treatment, and you can also make it possible to integrate it with Earth observation data. I think a lot of the evaluation is not possible because the project locations are missing. And that's why you can have the best Earth observation data sets out there, time series and all that. If you don't have this, well, you can't, they're not very useful. So what are the problems? So I reviewed over 120 IFAD projects, and the data is really messy. So it's in PDF format, Word format, CSV, GeoJSON, GeoPackers, any format you can imagine. You have to manually extract it from PDFs. It's been partially corrected only in one district, but on the other. And there was only just one person who was very passionate about it. So this data is really, really heterogeneous, to put it positively. And most people can't open a shapefile. Most people don't know. So it's and then attributes are missing. You know that something happened, but then you don't know what happened. And so there are lots of, and there are just some quotes here from all these different users, with all the problems that they're facing. And I think this is universal, but not only for IFAD, but also KfW, and also our colleagues from the Global Environment Facility. Also, the World Bank has a large mapping program. So this is something that we all share. So in this chapter that I wrote together with Kunwar, you'll find the solution, at least for impact evaluation. Yeah, so we have a nice structured approach with practical advice, how to identify what data do I actually need, how to get the data, because the data could be collected by different people at different times. Then to check if it's, how to clean it, to check if it's complete, and then to translate it into your impact evaluation. So please read it when it's out. And then for everybody else, apart from evaluators, evaluators are at the end of the project cycle, but we need to standardize the data. And otherwise, it would be a dream if we could reduce the time for evaluation. Where is data? What is happening to? Oh, I can just download it. And the standard that that KfW have pioneered like for 4 years ago, right? 7 years ago, and we're learning from them. Basically, you have like all the intervention records for project locations in one layer or 3 layers: point, line, and polygon. And basically, you could capture all that. So that's what I'm going to hand over to Maja now, who's going to introduce the standard.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Oliver. I wanted just to quickly ask, who of you knows the IATI standard? Okay, I will keep it then a little bit more abstract. So, so basically, it is what Oliver said. It was very much from your individual institutional perspective. And now we go to the cross-institutional perspective. And we were thinking like, we have our own nice data model, but if we want to compare our data with others like World Bank or AfD or IFAD, then basically we can't, yeah, because we have different data types and different attributes, and how can we come to a common data model? And when we were thinking about that, we thought it is always better to use something existing which already many institutions are using for their reporting, and to make this better instead of developing something new, then basically that where everybody thinks, yeah, why this one? There could also be others. And that's why we decided we want to attach ourselves to the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which was formed in 2010 and which is really the global standard for all development and humanitarian aid data used, and is currently used by over 2,000 organizations worldwide. And this is also agreed with the partner governments, which is also, I mean, this is the most important, that this is basically, if you enter something into the standardization process, then all the governments who are participating, NGOs, civil society representatives, they can give their input to the standardization process. And this is why we thought, okay, we look at the IATI standard as it is. It has already data types that are referring to locations, but the problem is that this is not yet coherent and not yet operational. So there are some institutions who are trying to use the location data that is offered by IATI, but it's not really working. And that's why in our MEPNI community of practice, to which everybody is cordially invited, we ask, are the members, we have about 30 to 40 members right now, I think, are they interested in together developing this draft proposal to make the IATI standard operational for locations? And there was overwhelming support in this. And that what I'm going to present here is the outcome of this exercise. So it's not that I developed it, but it was really the community of practice developing it. And going a little bit back again to where we came from. So this is an example of KfW locations, but this is not our locations, but the locations that were provided by different project executing agencies, different consultants in one African region. And what you can see is that basically they collect completely different data types, and even there are different languages being used. Some have more data types, some have almost nothing. So, and basically when we collected this, we thought, yeah, okay, how can we analyze this data? Yeah, really difficult. So why is this a problem? You mentioned already the problems at the institutional level, but at the cross-institutional level, if we want, as many actors support one partner country, then and we don't have a way to compare our data, we create support gaps. We create targeting biases. We cannot coordinate among each other, so everything becomes ineffective and inefficient. And also, what is really important for most of us is, how can we track the use of funds? How can we ensure that we don't duplicate funding? Yeah, which is always not nice. So that is basically the background why there was such a great interest in this. So basically, in operationalizing the IATI standard, the first step, and this is many of our members have already done this, is to basically take the existing IATI data. As I mentioned, almost everybody is reporting at the project level, and then they just assign this data to the coordinates, to exact coordinates, some some to approximate coordinates, yeah, so that at least you can have a map here in this World Bank example where there is a point coordinate, and then you can see to which project this is contributing. But then all the location-specific data obviously is missing. And this is what our main focus was. So if you now just give a quick example. So now KfW, and with our open data platform, we can put on a map all the project locations and aggregate them according to the location types, to which sector they belong. Like we have here all location types from the which are related to energy in yellow. These are for power plants, transmission lines, etc. And then we can create, with this you can then create an identifier. You can tell at which status of implementation each activity at each location is. Yeah. Before in the IATI standard, you can only say in which status of implementation the entire project is. But now you can do it by location, which is incredibly useful for our portfolio managers. When they prepare their missions or their monitoring reports, they can see, okay, is this location on track or not, etc. So this gives a nice overview. When we looked at the location data types, we basically I'm trying here to summarize what we propose to change. So fix the bugs and make the standard leaner and more meaningful. So one important matter that came up, which is related to the definition of a location, which was mentioned by Oliver, is that in the current IATI standard, the IATI standard only looks at one project that can have many sites. And these sites have location IDs. But it doesn't account for a location that can be the target location of many projects, or even one coordinate can also be the location of different sub-activities of one project. And this is not, the current IATI standard cannot account for that. So what we wanted to do is to create meaningful location attributes that reference the project or activity context. I'm a little bit switching between project and activity here, because the IATI standard only talks about activities because they couldn't agree on the definition of a project. Just it's not for you not to be confused. So basically, the idea is to enable us to say, where are KfW, Asian Development Bank, and the EU providing loans for hydropower plants globally? Something like this would be the final objective to be able to achieve. Yeah? Or where are the locations of all education sector projects in Bangladesh, where implementation already started, regardless of the donor or project execution agency. Yeah, and for this, we basically needed to make the existing IATI location types list more concise and more useful for development and humanitarian aid, because the current list was created by the military in the Second World War, so it doesn't totally fit with our objectives. Yeah, and then last but not least, to connect the locations or with the exact coordinates, or to connect them to useful and updated admin unit repositories, or, which is also fascinating, sector-specific repositories like the IUCN Protected Areas repository. And if you know more useful repositories, by the way, please let us know. Then we will include it in our draft proposal to IATI. So now what is this? Actually, I tried to animate this, but it didn't work. So now I have to overwhelm you with this table. So what exists already in IATI is the IATI location ID, which links to a repository, in most cases to geonames or ISO codes of the administrative boundaries. But as I mentioned, it has no relationship to the project identifier in IATI, to the project ID. So this is why we propose to include to add a field ID which links the coordinate with all the attributes of the activity or sub-activities of a specific location. And this is basically which allows us to not only link the project with all its locations, but also to link one location, geographic location, with all the project activities. And then we propose to add a location name to help really to make this identification more transparent and clear, like to really say not only a school, which would be a location type, but the name of the school. Then in IATI is already a location activity description, which we would keep, which is the most useful data type in the current version of IATI. But to add the activity status of the project at the location and to update the location types list. And then in the IATI standard, there is already the geographic exactness. So a location would always be exact. So basically, this is really the coordinates, but they have only point coordinates at the moment. Or it can be approximate. So that means it is kind of not exactly there. But also here's the problem. We don't know why it is approximate. And this is, I think, very important for not only evaluators, but also operational staff. So we propose to create 3 reasons for why this is approximate, which from our experience are the most important ones. One possibility is we don't know yet the exact location because we didn't maybe choose it yet, because maybe we are in the pipeline stage of the project, or the location is an admin unit, and then by definition it is approximate, or the exact location should not be disclosed for security reasons in fragile contexts. And we believe that if we create these additional categories, we can make it really more useful. So then we have the geospatial attributes that we need not only points, but also lines, polygons, and then to make the distinctions, if this is a forest polygon, then we really have to draw it. But if it's an admin unit or the protected areas IUCN polygon, then we need to take it from the repository. So this is basically the model. And now, if we look at another example of our projects here, we have universities that we are supporting, where the activities are under implementation. And then what you see here, this is all the IATI project level data types. And we are proposing to add some here. But the most important one is here, the next one, which is the location level data types, which I can't explain now for time reasons. But please ask me. I hope the presentations will be shared. And if you have any comments, questions, feedback, then I'm happy to respond to that. I wanted to show here what we changed in the location types list, but also this basically is probably too much detail now. But if you're interested, we are happy to share with you. We have a GitHub page also where we basically propose all these changes. And as you can see, we took some location types from the old list we found useful, like road, and kept it, but added one-to-one connections to additional attributes. And then we added lots of location types which were not there, like there was not sanitary facility even. Maybe not so important for the military, but important for us. And you have also an example of an IUCN location type, national park, and also target area related location types like capacity development and training, which completely wasn't there before at all. So this is basically some examples. And then also we created a list of you, from our perspective, useful admin unit repositories. If you find something missing there, please let us know. We are also going to submit this to the IATI Secretariat, and that's us. And yeah, please contact us and please join.
Thank you so much. We went a little over time, so I think I will just move to the next presenter now, and then I'm sure Oliver and I will have to ask a question. So our next presenter is Jeff Michler. He's an associate professor of agriculture and resource economics at the University of Arizona and a co-director of the AI Development and Evaluation Lab. His research applies industrial organization, contact theory, microeconometrics, and experimental economics to agriculture risk management, rural development, food security, and environmental and natural resource issues in developing country settings. Jeff, the floor is yours.
So for a little background on this paper, it's actually split off from the paper that Eleanor presented earlier. When we were asked to write that paper, we turned in a manuscript draft that was more than twice as long as Ariel and Kunwar had asked for. And so they had us split off the paper into two different ones. This one has evolved into something called treatment geometry. So I'm going to explain what treatment geometry is and introduce this as a concept to guide the decisions that we make as we go from raw data to final causal estimates. We were only asked to do this, or we decided to do this in November of last year. So it's a very short timeline. And so to help get it done, we roped in a bunch of other co-authors. And so there's a number of case studies in the chapter that illustrate these ideas in a very practical way. All right. So I want to start off with, so frequently we think of spatial merges or other sort of decisions that we make as a technical decision. But this isn't the whole point of this treatment geometry concept, is that the decisions we make, even about something as simple as a spatial merge, define the causal estimates that we will be able to create. So these decisions that we make are not just about measurements, not just choosing a buffer or a boundary, a line or a polygon. When you make that choice, you constrain yourself to what you can identify. And so treatment geometry you can think of as the empirical form of your causal question. So as I mirrored my presentation on Eleanor's, we have four sections that we're going to talk through. First, we're going to talk about how we can see or visualize this geometry, how we'll assign it to data, what that does for our identification strategy, and then how we should define or what sort of stress tests we should run. Treatment geometry is, you can think of it as similar to your theory of change or your causal pathway, but it is more than that. It is taking that causal idea of like, these are the mechanisms that will go from the intervention to the impact, and then mapping those things into your geospatial data in a conceptual way. So what is the treatment? Is it a policy? Is it some hazard? Is it the path of a locust? What's the time window? Do effects accumulate over time, such as effects of pollution? Do they dissipate over time, such as the effects of deforestation based on a boundary? Jeff Bloom was in here, he talked about that this morning. And the goal isn't to define a universal geometry or standard that applies to everyone. It's the goal is to create a systematic way to think about how we make these choices so that we are better able to justify these choices in our paper, in our research, and if we can do a better job of justifying them, then our research becomes more transparent and more replicable. So we can break down the concept of treatment geometry into four different choices or questions that you'd ask yourself. One is, where does the exposure originate? Is it a project? Is it a natural event? Who is exposed? What's the receiving unit? Is a person, a firm, a natural landscape? What's the pathway to exposure? How does it propagate? Does it move across space like locust? Does it move across time like locust, or is it static? And what's the time window? Is it a season? Is it a lifetime? When does how long is someone exposed, and when does exposure matter? You know, we saw earlier, exposure really matters in at the planting or at the growth stage of a crop, not necessarily after harvest. There's a lot of different reasonable choices that we can make. Two researchers can have the same exact question or look at the same exact intervention and reasonably make different choices. And so when you have the sort of degrees of freedom where there are multiple reasonable ways to do something, we need to be explicit about what choices we made and why we made those choices, because they will affect our identification. So this is just that similar slide in more detail, thinking about what the spatial footprint is, the temporal footprint. What is the resolution? How are we going to aggregate this, right? Some of you are familiar with the measurement area unit problem. The way you aggregate stuff up affects what you're estimating. What's the intensity? Is it a binary or is it a dose response? And what are the boundaries and the directions that treatment moves? Once you have sat down and thought about the conception of the geometry of treatment, you know, how you go from a theory of change to an empirical representation, then you need to assign that treatment geometry or assign that exposure to the actual data. And so one choice that you need to make is what is being measured? What is the empirical variable that treatment is quantified as? Is it a binary? You're either in the flood zone or you're out of the flood zone. Is it the share of land that was burned? Is it a land classification? Is it the distance to a road? And so I was taking notes this morning during the JDE sections, and one paper used the percentage of area affected. One paper used a continuous variable of distance from a point. Another used a threshold where if you were above 0.3 NDVI, then you were treated. If you're below that, you were not. Some was just a binary if the land was cleared or not. Then what's the receiving unit of this exposure? And so again, we had a number of papers this morning. One, the receiving unit was a village. Another was a pixel. Another was a field. Another was a parcel. If you have pixel level data and you want a parcel, well, actually, that's the next slide. You want field level data. You have a field and you have pixel level data. How are you going to aggregate that up? Is it just the mean of all the pixel values? Or is it an area weighted share of the pixels that get intersected? And again, there's this measurement area unit problem. When you aggregate things up, you're measuring something different than if you don't aggregate it. So it's not just a way to simplify the data or make it match with make one data set match with the other, that spatial join. You're affecting the estimand that you're actually generating. Then you use public data sources like the LSMS or the now defunct DHS or MIX. The fact that for obvious privacy reasons, we can't release those specific coordinates of households. They're displaced somehow, and that adds another level of complexity to defining your treatment geometry. And so this image comes from a paper that Talib Kilic and Anna Josephson and Siobhan Murray and I wrote, where we got access to the true coordinates of the LSMS, and then we chose a number of different ways to displace those coordinates called statistical disclosure limitations. And then we looked at, well, how does those affect the estimates that we create? One thing that's come up throughout for the first day and a half is that higher resolution is not synonymous with quality, right? All of this data that we're using is interpolated. They're all modeled estimates. And so I can create really finely, make my pixels really, really small. All I do is have to keep interpolating, right? I could downscale chirps to be really, really finely gridded, but all I'm doing is making estimates that are probably less and less precise as I go to a smaller and smaller scale. So just because you have high resolution data, that data has been interpolated and that it will introduce errors that, as we've seen, will propagate throughout the process. So you want to choose the spatial support and the temporal support that matches your question. Right. Having mapped your treatment onto the data, that's going to then define what sort of effects you can measure. And so thinking about identification, you need to think about estimand clarity. Are you estimating direct effects, indirect effects? What is the comparison group? Your treatment geometry determines what your comparison group is. Is it the nearest neighbor? Is it a distance along the road? Is it inside a boundary or just outside of a boundary? What's the spatial spillovers? Is SUTVA violated? So making those decisions early on in the process is going to determine what the comparison group is going to look like. So the further you go along in the research process, the more deterministic things become, because the choices you make earlier on constrain the things that you can do later on. Thinking about the estimand and the comparison group allows you to think clearly about what the threats to identification are. Let's see. Yep. Okay. So that's an illustration of this is an illustration of the different geometry, different spatial merges define what estimand is. Oh, perfect. So your choices about how you're aggregating define what you're actually estimating. What you're estimating will define what your comparison group is. It's not always the nearest neighbor. It may be upstream. And then this is where I was trying to jump to, is when you think about threats to identification, you think about interference, right? What are the spatial spillovers? Are you going to measure the direct effects or the total effects? There's also the issue of misclassification. So again, these geospatial data are estimates, they're interpolated, and it's very easy to think that you have a precise line for the boundary of a flood. And so this household is on one side and is therefore untreated. This household is on the other side and therefore treated. But there is uncertainty around that boundary. What's the 95% confidence interval that the boundary is right there? And so there's it's very easy to end up with misclassification when you're using this geospatial data. If you don't have a good sense of the data generating process, this is what Eleanor's presentation was about. If you don't have a good sense of what the uncertainty is within the geospatial data, you can end up misclassifying treated and untreated fairly easily. You won't even know it. Misclassification is distinct from measurement error. Measurement error is a thing that as economists we think about a lot. Measurement error can be classical, can be non-classical. Again, we, as an economist, we have spent the last 15 years wringing our hands about self-reported data in agriculture, self-reported harvests, self-reported land area, self-reported crop type. At least for me as an economist, it's only recently that I begin to think about the measurement error that exists in the geospatial data. We've talked about foundation models. They can do a lot for us, but they're going to be sparse and poor predictors in the places that a lot of us are working because there's not data to train the model on in those areas. And so there's going to be measurement error, and it's often going to be non-classical. It's going to be dependent location. Who was talking earlier about the location of, is Eleanor, obviously, location of weather stations, right? They're going to be where infrastructure is. They're not going to be out in a pastoralist region. And so if you're going to use this data to key a index insurance product to that pays herders when they lose their cattle, you're not going to have good data where that is. And so those estimates of what the weather looks like there are going to be fuzzy. And that is by definition non-classical because it's correlated with a thing that we're interested in. So having thought about your treatment geometry, having mapped that to actual data, then thinking about what sort of estimand that allows you to generate, what the threats to identification are, all those things will tell you how do you need to stress test your results. And when you're stress testing your treatment geometry, you want to stress test the geometry itself, not just the regression. In economics, we run lots and lots of robustness checks, but usually we're changing the specification, right? And so Yuri Shonshin describes that as the multi-analysis approach. There's the other way of thinking about this is changing the data. It's a multiverse approach. You're changing the underlying data that you're looking at. You're analyzing a different data set. Therefore, you're analyzing effectively a different universe. And so you want to vary not just the regression specification, put in fixed effects, do your nice new Callaway-Santana estimators, but you want to change the underlying data. Well, what happens if I misclassified these individuals who were exposed to flood? What if I change 5% of them or move the line a little bit? How does that change my estimates? So that's looking at a different possible universe and asking, how does that affect, or are my results sensitive to those choices? So all of this can be kind of heady or very theoretical or very conceptual, not theoretical, because the whole point is mapping it to a reality. So to illustrate this idea, we brought in all of our co-authors to generate case studies. They're usually about a page and a half. They all have the same structure, and they're all asking, what do I have a case where I have spillovers. How do I deal with that? What choices should I make? How does those choices affect my estimates? And then how would I stress test it? What sort of robustness checks should I do? So we talk about spatial spillovers. We talk about the directionality of treatment. What happens when you have sparse inputs and you need to interpolate missing values or aggregate values up so you don't have sparse data anymore? Talk about geo-registration, these displaced points. How does that affect your estimates? What's the timing of exposure? What's the crop calendar look like? In this morning, some of the data was at a 2-week time step. Some was aggregated up to the cropping calendar. Some of it was divided into a growing stage and a planting stage. Some of it was annual. There's a number of different choices, and all of those are, I do not at all mean to imply some of those are invalid. They're all driven by the thing that you're trying to estimate. And the goal of the treatment geometry is to find a standardized or a systematized way to think about this and talk about this, and therefore make our results more replicable and more transparent. So at the very end of the chapter, we have a short protocol on how to implement this idea. And so it starts by defining the source of the treatment. Where is it coming from? What sort of measurement error might already be in it? We've just heard about measurement error from the very beginning being built into our aid data. What's the unit that's receiving it? Is the household, is an individual within the household? How do you match that unit to the gridded data? How do you match that unit to fuzzy location data of where the aid was applied? Those are important decisions that you're making. Those affect what you can estimate. What's the rule of assignment? How do you decide who is treated, what unit is treated, and who isn't? And then documenting the uncertainty around your treatment geometry. How confident can we be in our results? And if we make seemingly innocuous changes, does that affect our outcomes? If you want to see how seemingly innocuous changes affect outcomes, come and hear me talk tomorrow afternoon, and we'll show you how choices about weather data products completely change what the estimated treatment effects are. So geometry is not just a GIS detail. Rather, it's the empirical expression of your causal question. So that's what I want to leave you with, and I hopefully have 6 or 7 minutes for questions. And direct them all to Eleanor.
Richard?
Yeah, Mitch, I have a question. Something I think about a lot. I fund a lot of evaluations. I don't do them anymore, but one thing I think about is treatment intensity, and it can definitely vary spatially. And I'm wondering if you've ever considered adding that as an attribute here.
Yeah, so that is, I went through quickly. That is one of the questions to ask yourself is is there a dose response? What is the intensity? Jeff's paper this morning was good. You looked at the pixels and mapped or fit a gamma distribution to the pixels so that the intensity of treatment dissipated over distance. And so, yeah, that's a thing that is an important decision, right? It allows you to choosing a continuous variable versus a discrete variable one allows you to estimate the extensive margin, one allows you to estimate the intensive margin. Those are different things. Those choices matter to what you can measure, what you can estimate.
Obviously, and this at some point is run into your issue of how to a spatial origin related. Have you thought about like to what degree it feeds into variables on the left-hand side versus on the right-hand side? Because I feel like that's going to have an important impact on the measurable effect. I think the version that you were thinking about specifically was like error in the treatment assignment, which is definitely a right-hand side variable and obviously the most important one. But you could imagine if it's on the left-hand side and it's like not correlated with treatment, then it might just increase standard errors. I mean, have you thought about like a nice way to classify these types of errors in terms of like 5-alarm fire versus like 1-alarm fire, or like, I'm noisier than I should be.
Yeah. I mean, this propagates on the left-hand side too. I mean, how many papers have we seen with NDVI as an outcome variable? I don't know, you have a sense of classification of
that's a good question. It's not something we necessarily look at in the chapter of like which are more critical than others, but I think the case studies provide illustrations of the issues that we'll go over. So I think part of our hope is just to help people make it a little bit more transparent into some of the issue solving that as you're working on that exercise. But my suspicion is going to be a little bit more.
We're all doing this already. It's just trying to make it more concrete and explicit so that things can be reproduced quicker and with better consistency.
I should have a question pertaining to a first presentation, so the IATI's presentation. I was wondering whether you had to, how did you solve questions related to georeferencing road construction? Are you drawing a polyline? Are you just taking the centroid of a line? Line.
You have to always find the right level of aggregation.
Exactly.
Right? And we just do it as a line. And then as a researcher, you can then do your calculations on top of it, how basically around the road. But what you could do if you have a capacity development measure, which is at the administrative level, like the community, then you can add an additional sub-activity, capacity development training, which relates to the administrative unit polygon or to a school point, and that is then an additional activity in your map, which is the nice thing, So you don't have only to plot down the road.
Exactly. So likewise, when it is a budget support to the Ministry of Finance, then I assume that it is the whole country that is.
Yes, exactly.
And do you have like other cases like that you might want to share with us?
Yes.
Places where you had to
occupy the discussion. Let's do it later, and I will answer all your questions. This is exactly what I'm hoping for, actually.
Thank you.
Time for one more short question for Jeff. All good. Okay, so moving on to the next presentation from Rubayi Estes, I think if I said it right. So Rubayi is a social impact strategist and principal at Estrat Solutions. Her expertise spans evaluation, cross-sector initiatives, and philanthropy, and her work is featured in policy briefs and international reports. She has consulted for the World Bank, Save the Children, Oxfam International, and several universities. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Here, everyone. So the topic of ethics is something that is continuing to The topic of ethics is definitely continuing to develop. So today I really invite you to bring in your comments, your expertise, as you heard from all the speakers preceding us today,
everyone is thinking about it and often articulating in their published papers on what they wish they could have done or what data they wish they could have had. So what my co-author and I really attempt to do here is provide a rubric with multiple phases across the GIE life cycle to see whether you can use the rubric to, within your conditions, to measure against what you desire to have as a very ethical methodology in your GIE work. Now, I am going to go over 5 decades of methodologies and history of GIS. And so bear with me, I'm going to try and stick to my notes. And then I'm really hoping to have a lot of time for questions because everything you share here today is going to inform the iterative piece of this rubric. So one of the key things for us really is that ethical consideration is not peripheral to GIE. They're foundational and and it actually impacts its scientific validity and social legitimacy as well. And so my co-author is Lovely Dillon. She's not here today, but she is a legal and ethical framework expert with social entrepreneurs and philanthropy. I myself work on ethics and equity evaluation methodology with philanthropy, government, and INGOs. And I also invite you to challenge some of the claims that we make here, but I hope it's not daunting. The idea is that it has high utility. I think that's the most important piece. The tool in itself can be, the paper can be abandoned, but what is going to be useful for you in your application? So we'll begin with why it matters. I'm hoping there's not going to be too much disagreement in the room on that one. But efforts in integrating ethics is not just a new concept. Like I mentioned, there's 5 decades of foundational methodologies that precede us. And the historical evolution of ethical GIS practice, including countermapping, public participation GIS, and critical remote sensing are going to play a very critical role in the creation of this rubric. This just earlier today, listening to Sarah's presentation, to Eleanor's, to Vivek's, it's really interesting because I don't know if we are at a stage with this ever-changing evolution of technology that this rubric will not change tomorrow. So I really invite you to think through those. And it's also based on 15 principles that was done with a GeoEthics conference, and we'll talk a little more about that. So the tool in itself is called Geospatial Ethics and Social Accountability Tool, or I'm going to refer to it as GSET. Oops, I'm going to go one more. All right. So, like I mentioned, given the expansive capacity today of technologies and the ever-changing instruments, we believe that enabling enhanced monitoring or population density data or locational data, infrastructure and scaling of your findings as well really creates a bigger need for ethical considerations as it might amplify biased information or it might amplify data that is in the system. Earlier today, we were talking about how artificial intelligence is not completely, but is dominated by the global north. And the more we mine that data, the more, especially if we're going to be mining it automatically, the more predominant it becomes and the voices of those that we're collecting data about becomes more and more mute. So if you don't leave with anything today, nothing about us without us is what we're kind of leaning into here. So one of the case studies that we show in the chapter is the UNHCR case study. Very wonderful map, actually, geospatial layer documenting refugee settlements, service infrastructure. This is a dream of a health and humanitarian supply chain manager, right? So you can identify exactly where the needs are, where needs may grow with increasing conflict areas, and really is a priceless tool, but it also lends itself to a dual use dilemma. So some of the locational precision here, it's a great map that enables effective crisis response, can also expose vulnerable populations to surveillance. And forced deportation, targeted political harm, as we've seen before, and errors and unauthorized exposure, those can't be pulled back. So reuse of this data, and once it's out there, it's available for misuse, it's available for all of the purposes that we did not intend the data sets for. So UNHCR, of course, was very responsive to these concerns at a very early stage of developing this map as human rights advocates had raised these concerns. So the key GIE lesson here have been irreversibility. High resolution locational data cannot be unshared once it's disclosed. Ethical review must happen before dissemination. So this is going to play out throughout the chapter on when we do consider ethics in our stage of whether it is impact evaluation, or in this case specifically GIE. that which stage what needs to be applied is going to be really important. Ethical review is often done with IRB for pre and post review, and that would not be effective here, right? So the same technologies that enhance evaluation methodology, that enhance and expand our observational capacity, also can exacerbate our inequities globally. Here. So there, like I mentioned, the IRB piece, there are, in IRB, it doesn't really ask about does satellite observation constitute surveillance? It's looking at your project within the parameters that you have proposed it to be. You'll also look at the professional codes. These are available to you, and you've probably all studied and been certified in them on what are the ethical codes that you must abide by as GIS specialists, as GIE specialists. And you can embed this into your analytical workflow, but there isn't really a guiding instrument. And then, of course, this is the gap that we're trying to fill. So can locational data and the public interest that's been published become a normative grounding to your work? All right, so does the Bowman expedition just sound like old news to all of you? Is it something you're all very familiar with? It was news to me, of course, but okay, just so I'm not an analyst myself. So this really was a keystone in the American Geography, AAG, sorry, the Bowman expedition. It was in the 90s. It was exemplary of a methodology called PPGIS, which is the public participation GIS methodology. And it really was something that, it spanned over a number of years because it was an exemplary intervention where there was a researcher who went from the University of Kansas to the Mexico Indigena Project, and they worked with 3 indigenous tribes, the Tinec, the Nahua, and the Zapotec communities in Mexico. These communities, because of this process, actually willingly participated and were happy to be invited into a spatial project that was about their land, their community, and would also advance their ability to actually make decisions and policy decisions in their land. So although it was a truly engaged process, what was never disclosed was the primary funder. So this project was actually funded by the U.S. Army Foreign Military Studies Office, and it was also funded by a weapons contractor. So who found this out? It wasn't a researcher. It was actually an activist who was part of the Union of Organizations of the Sierra Juarez of Oaxaca and a local indigenous rights organization group. And they coined the term, Aldo Gonzalez particularly coined the term geopiracy. And it really talks about that extractive nature of impact evaluation in a lot of our ID world. And again, it kind of replaying itself in what appeared and truly was intended to be a genuinely participatory process. So what this yielded for us as part of GSAT is we can talk about PPGIS, but participation does not always mean ethical legitimacy. A project can be participatory, but it can still be extractive. We find this in a lot of our focus groups, CBPR processes. So what could we do differently? Secondly, informed consent does not include full disclosure of funding sources, purpose, and of course, downstream data use, and not just methodology. So like in any field of expertise, we learn from this process. So this is not necessarily a terrifying case as much as action was taken. So the AAG actually revised its statement of professional ethics in November 2009 to directly respond to this case. So we want more cases like these. So these were the 5 decades of history. I'm not going to go through them with you completely, but what had changed was it went from a top-down technology-driven process to a more nuanced, reflexive methodology, and it emphasizes equity, justice, and methodological rigor. And I really loved hearing about standardization and constants, and this is what will matter in all application throughout the process of applying GIE. So 1960s, the geographic data was primarily used by government and military. I think somebody else referenced that today. We're not following those intentions anymore. In 1980s, we saw growing recognitions of the limitation of relying solely on spatial data. That's why GIE, the field, has been designed to be done in pairing with with surveys, with impact evaluation on the ground. And then critical cartography also began to challenge what was supposed to be objective maps in 1980s. So quite early on, this work had started. 1990, some instruments came into play. So there was critical GIS, which is going to play a role in our rubric. And there was also counter mapping by Nancy Lee Peluso, which was really valuable. Counter mapping had so many iterations from anywhere from the global north to the global south, where indigenous communities, particularly or historically marginalized communities, were able to produce low-tech mapping to actually counter policy arguments by GIS mappers. So this was an incredible effort. It really took the buy-in of those doing the research to create the seat and space. And that had relationships, trust building, and it wasn't always successful. But the field of study for GIS and society had emerged as a result. And in 95, Ground Truth was published, which is the social implication of GIS by John Pickles, which is, again, sorry to take you down the history lessons, but this work wouldn't happen without the work that they had already done. PPGIS came into the 2000s, and then we'll spend a little time actually with critical GIS. So Mia Bennett's work, absolutely incredible. I think this was published only a year or two ago, really started going into the cyclical life of your research and asking certain questions on exposure. So it asks about, could this remote sensing be done as field work? Is it necessary? Consider risks of making places seen and making available the possibility of community veto. Now, community veto means that you as a researcher has been funded, has made that decision, and there's multiple institutions behind you likely. But if a community has the autonomy to say, no, we do not want this data to be collected, how do you actually manage that? So how do you build that into your early decision-making process? Engagement, it's about the people who are in the area, but not just who are inhabiting there, but who else is in that demographic? How are the genders broken down? What is the socioeconomics? What is the frequent migration into that locale? Empowerment, of course, research empowerment. This is something I've heard for the 3 years this work has been happening, and building capacity in the global south so that the data is not constantly just belonging to us, but actually belonging to the people that we're collecting that data from. But they can also be trained if necessary. In some places, you have universities on site where they're actually building on the work that you've been funded to do initially. So that's where the teaching piece comes in, accessibility and acknowledgement as well of what you were not able to do as all of you do today. In 2022, the AAG came together with the SRI, UC Santa Barbara Center for Spatial Studies, and actually proposed geoethics principles. This was Dr. Goodchild's paper that was published this last year, and he's actually going to read this chapter, so I'm a little anxious, but at the same time, oops, I did not. There we go. There were 15 principles that were articulated by experts across the globe. So these are practitioners, again, particularly in GIS. It's going to be really important to move this chapter into GIE and test this rubric over and over again. And we have a case study in the end that we did test. I'm not going to cover them all, but legitimacy and necessity is one of the ones that we see more seldomly. Data collection must have well-defined objectives. Dangerous uses, tracking vulnerable refugees must be prohibited, and data must not be repurposed beyond its intended use. So this is that open knowledge, how you disseminate the data, this constant conflict. So if you are considering these parameters at a very early stage, hopefully the aftermath and the burden is going to be less in what you're going to put out there. Proportionality and universality is going to be really important, and this is where you're balancing your benefits and harms. Is it necessary to use the methodology that you came in with as an institution? Security and re-identification risk. Some of the agricultural data, specifically in rural areas, if we are going to say that we want to involve the individuals that are in those acreages of land, we're also looking at a very small sample of individuals in rural communities. So this is that other balance of how do you engage folks, still collect the data, still empower folks, but still de-identify individuals who might be vulnerable because of maybe sociopolitics in the region. And coming back to standardization, reassessment is going to be really important. And reassessment and accountability so that there's actually standardization in how you do it. So I'm actually going to try and rush through this because I really want some comments back here. So GSAT is a rubric. It's self-assessment tool. Sorry. It is designed to guide students and practitioners in evaluating ethical risks, strengthening reflexivity, minimizing harm, and promoting equitable development outcomes within your available conditions. This is not a measuring tool to say this is a universal right configuration. It is a contextual tool for resources and budgets that you come in with that are available to you, and it allows for a 0 to 5 scale. So I'm going to skip right to that. There we go. 0 to 5 scale. And it has 6 phases. So we look at pre-project ethical scoping, equity and representation, remote sensing to establish baseline conditions, locational data collection, statistical analysis, visual interpretation. Goes all the way from 0 of critical ethical failure to 5 across all of these phases. And we believe that the phases beautifully nest into the GIE stages of design, data collection, analysis, interpretation, dissemination. But as you've heard here, there are many other steps that are occurring in your analysis and interpretation, and this is where we really need your help and expertise. So these phases tuck into these areas. So let's take, for example, the pre-project ethical scoping and design. What could a key ethical action be? You could do power mapping, define ethical boundaries. You could recruit diverse stakeholders. And what extent is that diversity? Is it your social capital? Is it social capital of your first touch point on the ground? Is it actually asking those who are not in your circles on who should be at the table? And all the way through dissemination, we talk about responsible knowledge transfer, and we talk about making results more accessible. Now, this is just, there's 2 screenshots of the tool in itself. I'm going to skip through these, but I think they'll be available to you, as chapter will as well, with all 6 phases. They actually give you an activity on each level and the key actions of if you've progressively performed these at each phase, you would have developed informed consent with participation protocols, ensure transparent communication, incorporate diverse perspectives into your design, and assure non-retaliation. What we did, as I mentioned, it was based on countermapping, critical remote sensing, and the geoethics work from Dr. Goodchild. Again, I do want to emphasize this is not a checklist. You could be at many different stages of this work. So we used a use case from the Mercy Corps MRED, and I believe Denis and Kunwar presented that yesterday. And I hope everyone knows their paper was tested here. They did very well. Sugar canes in Nepal, 52 treatment villages, 31 comparisons, 25 spillover communities. Difference in difference methods and optimal full matching, random forest crop classifications. And you heard from them also that the sugarcane adoption increased by 22% in year 1. But by year 4, the expected environmental benefits didn't actually come into place in the study. So when we were running this case study after the fact through the rubric, we found that each one of, they performed a 3 out of 5, which is considered structured ethical approach. So the communities were selected through a structured participatory scoring system. And prior to that, Mercy Corps relationships also allowed them access to certain stakeholders. So, however, communities did not co-create the evaluation. So a key action could have been to create a community advisory group, for example, in this process. It's not always viable. It's understandable. So this is actually a great score, even if it starts at 3. Remote sensing baseline, equity and representation. So the program targeted vulnerable communities by design, subsistence farmers facing seasonal flooding and 40% of farmland submersion. However, the village level unit of analysis obscured intra-community diversity. And this is where we talk about gender, caste, ethnicity. And I know Maja is going to be a great advocate for this. And they could have used a different type of a social, like the advisory group could have been part of this, engaging faith-based organizations could have been a part of this, and going all the way to, I think, one of them, statistical analysis. This is particularly exemplary for this group, especially because they had village level analysis done. There was also a period of time that they were able to spend on this project. So I think it allowed for more saturation of information and data and filtration from the village perspectives as well, and local perspectives. So this was a test we did. We're hoping that a tool that looks as simple as this across 6 phases that fits into your project cycle beautifully can be of use, and without using it as a measuring stick, that it will be something that allows you to really play out what all of you have spoken about over the last 2 days. So I just want to acknowledge all the amazing folks that have contributed to even just guiding what the chapter in itself, but also their work that also continues everywhere from NYU to UC Santa Barbara, coast to coast. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maja. Any questions for Maja, please?
Thanks for that. I have a really foundational question. So going back to your HCR example, where we're concerned about surveillance of refugee populations, there's the current world where we get pretty regular global sub-meter base maps by Google that anybody can access. And if you are a malicious actor who wants to find refugee settlements, you'd be able to do that by hiring the right technical folks. This world in which we have HCR data simply speeds up the access to that information and doesn't require a whole bunch of ML engineers. So what is the fundamental difference of making that data available versus sort of the business as usual, where somebody with intent can identify a group that they wish to punish, attack, harass, etc.?
This is a really, I don't think I have an answer for that, because we also believe that equity is advanced by creating more open knowledge and available maps for those who don't typically have access to it. I think the responsible use, what is your footprint? And not everyone is going to be looking at these maps. What is your footprint as an institution? Who is going to be your reader base? That may be where you consider the responsibilities as an institution. If I want to increase my supply chain efficiency, is this the best way to do it? What is the purpose of having a public map of refugee settlements? Or does it need to be an interinstitutional process? I'm not quite sure I have an answer for that. It is a push and pull. Oh, please, Maja.
To be part of a mapping project in Sudan during the CPA, that means before 2011. And we did a huge mapping effort between different aid organizations. And the aim was to publish all this data and to make it basically transparent for everybody. And there was data in it that you could also get now on Google Maps, like any big building, right? But there was also data like migratory routes, which might not so easily be found, which was in this map. And then the government didn't allow us to publish it. And then the government had that data, yeah? And it's like 2 years later, the government started dropping bombs, yeah? So this is maybe a very horrible example, but this is basically, so even if there's lots of data available, you should always think about maybe you have some data that is sensitive and that not everybody has, and then you have to really think well if you want to publish this, and already even on which server you put this data, right, nowadays.
And just to add, in agricultural use, this is a little more manageable, right? Because if you are actually including the farmers in this conversation before, during, and after, they should be able to opt out of their data being represented in your data sets. Go ahead.
On that point, maybe, I don't know if you've thought about how this process can look, especially in the context of the EUDR and a lot of these now global or continental frameworks that are affecting people on the ground. And we're seeing an increased mapping of, for example, smallholders from people who don't live there, and what this would look like in the political framework, or how we as researchers can help to address this. Thank you.
It'd be great to consider. Thank you.
time is almost up, but if there's one more question, I think we have time. Please.
Just a question like how, if you have considered frameworks like CARE or indigenous data sovereignty, and I think the last one focuses on ethics, and that's been a little bit, the focus of your discussion. But have you explicitly thought about what is the sort of nexus with FAIR principles, CARE principles, etc.?
This is that next stage at this point, because there is so much work happening in parallel as well that's developing. So we have not actually cross-referenced this work at all with that. It's been mostly focused on ag application at this time, but we do need to look at FAIR principles and others. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I think that's all the time we have. So just